Hey there, so while I consider myself to be a video game enthusiast and a collector, I do occasionally enjoy the tabletop game here and there. I mean, you couldn't tell if you looked at my playtime for Final Fantasy XIV, or noticed that the museum downstairs in my library of video games ranges from the retro to the not-so-classic, but I digress. I mean, occasionally I'll put the controllers down to play a round of Magic the Gathering. I do have other games such as Villainous, or even Binding of Isaac 4 Souls, which has become my most recent favorite game involving cards. And that's the key point I want to get to. There have been not many games that have kept my interest for so long, except for one. And that is going to be the premise of this video and an upcoming series of videos that I have in store that I hope you'll enjoy. It revolves around the game known as simply Dominion. And I'm going to go into more details about Dominion so you guys can get a feel of what the game is like, not to mention the amount of cards that have come out that could be the equivalent of like 2 Magic the Gathering expansions. Toasty! 'Tis I, Dr. Dementia, and welcome to my new series called Dominion. What the? It is going to be a video series on the basics of the Dominion deck building game that was created by Donald X. Vaccarino in 2008 and published by Rio Grande Games. I'm going to go over the rules of how Dominion is played, and then the series will deviate into the expansions of the game and a list of all the cards that had been released, including the promos, which I will do as individual cards. In doing this series, I hope to not only expand my own knowledge of the game from when I started playing in late college, but also where I can teach a whole bunch of people how to play it as well. So we're going to get right into it, and we're going to start with the base game that originally came out in its 1.0 version. Trust me, there is a second one. We'll get to that soon. And then we will go into the list of the cards involved into it. So if you open up the box for the first time, you might look at it like, what the hell is this? This is chaotic for what could be a deck building game, but you'd be surprised. There's a lot in there, but if you take the time to learn how everything works, you'll understand eventually that everything has a process. It's a deck building game after all, and basically what you're building is your dominion over the kingdom. And there's resources, treasure, and basically victory points to get you to that goal. You have to start somewhere though, so when you get everything sorted out and you're ready to play, you're basically going to have for your foundation 3 estates, each worth 1 victory point, and 7 coppers, each worth 1 treasure. However, by the end of the game, you should be brimming with a lot more in there. And you need it too, because basically you're going to build the deck from the ground up. Your main goal is to be the one to control the most victory points, hence more of the kingdom than your opponents. And there's a lot of different ways you can go about them. And I'm going to go into each and every section of it as we go along, and you'll see it on screen that you'll have an understanding of what to do as you go on. Nice! So the first thing we're going to look at is the game board itself, which is essentially your supply. And it's basically going to be a bunch of cards you're going to have access to during the entirety of the game. And all of these cards that you see in front of you in the supply are available for you to obtain as long as you can afford it, because in economies such as this, you never know. It could change in a heartbeat. And you will use these cards to begin conquering the dominion of your kingdom and purge it of the infidels that claim to have it stake in this affair. Anyway, as you can tell, they're divided up into a few different categories. We have your treasures, your victory cards, as well as some curses. You want to step away from those a little bit. And a distinct set of 10 kingdom piles. And I'm going to go into these in more detail as we go along. Now, starting off, we have your victory cards, which are these green cards here that have a number as well as a crest on them. These are your basic victory cards, and this is how you're going to win the game, by getting the most. There are 3 different types. You have estates, which are worth 1 victory point, duchies, which are worth 3 victory points, and provinces, which are worth 6. Now, each of these cards, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, have a number inside of a gold coin. This is the cost to purchase the card. We will go into that detail a little bit later on. Being as this is the way you are supposed to win the game, The piles of these victory cards are limited rather than some of the other piles which may have 10 or more. If you are playing with a second person, be that your sibling, your younger brother or sister, or your spouse who wants to beat your ass in something that you know you will not be able to defy her in, you will have 8 cards in each of these piles. In larger games, such as 3 or 4 players, which is the average most people play this game with, you will have 10. However, there is a rule implemented that if you have more than 4 people, you add 3 more of each to the pile just to increase it. But more on that when you have more people to play with. I'm not assuming anything. Don't judge me. I play alone a lot of the time. Anyway, we're moving on right now. Next on our list are the treasure cards. Now, these are your basic treasures which are available in every game, and this is how you're going to go buy your shit. You have 3 types. You have coppers worth 1, silvers worth 2, and golds worth 3. While you start off with coppers, you do need to buy the silvers and golds as indicated. However, if you feel like you cannot afford any cards on the list, you may show shame to your opponent to obtain a copper at no cost, but that will take up a buy. More on that concept a little bit later on. Next up, we have these purple cards known as curses. They are simply -1 victory points, and while you could obtain them, why the hell are you doing that? Shut up, don't do that. You will get them through the effects of some action cards that are played during the course of the game, if they are available to you in the supply pile. And if you do get one, you could hate your opponent for it and curse them for all eternity. Or you might be able to take advantage of the curse through specific kingdom cards. So to begin, we'll talk about the different turn phases, and that is the action phase, the buy phase, and the cleanup phase. Now, the action phase is pretty self-explanatory. You're going to play any of the action cards that are available to you that you have purchased from the supply pile. Those are typically just white cards with like random effects in the bottom of it, and it will tell you exactly what you can do. Some cards say you could draw a card from the deck, or others could say you could buy something. Or you can get more treasure that will add to your treasures for your buy phase. There are also cards that can give you additional actions. If you play those first, then you can play more action cards from your deck. However, there are sometimes effects that you can't do, but that's fine. You still are going to want to do as many of the effects as possible on the card, even if you can't do them all. Pay attention to what some of the cards do, because some of them might have underlying effects that may not affect you immediately, but down the line, you'll still be able to take advantage of them. Next up, we have the buy phase. You'll take any treasures you have in your hand and place them face up in front of you. Now, this is your intention to be able to purchase something from the supply pile. I would like to remind you at this moment, early in the video I stated that all the cards that you play with has a number at the bottom left-hand corner of the card inside of a coin. This is the cost of the card. You need to have treasures equal to or greater than the amount shown on that card in order to purchase it. If you are able to, great. You have 1 buy to purchase anything on the pile by default. If you purchase a card, you have gained that card to use for your deck. It will immediately go into your discard pile, and the cost is deducted from whatever you have remaining in treasures. The reason I say that is because there are some cards that give you additional buys, and you could buy more than 1 card, tipping the advantage in your favor to purchase better treasures or even more victory points. The best part about it is that these treasures do not disappear after you use them. They will also go into the discard pile after you've spent these treasures, which means you can use them again. Hence the deck building mechanic. And that segues us to the cleanup phase, the final phase of your turn, in which you take any cards in play in your hand and discard them. And then you draw a fresh new hand of 5 cards for your next turn. Of course, if you have fewer than 5 cards in the deck, your discard pile is shuffled, and then you get to draw until you have 5. But wait a minute, you didn't tell us how to win. Well, if you will silence for 5 seconds, I will tell you. You will continue your turns in this fashion, going back and forth between you and your opponents until one of 2 conditions are met. The first simply, if you purchased all the cards in a supply pile, you have an empty pile. And if you get 3 of them in the course of the game will end. Coincidentally, there is a second alternate end condition. If the province victory card pile is empty by itself, the game will automatically end after that turn. At that point, all the players will count how many victory points from their decks that they have. And basically at that point, whoever has the most wins. If for whatever reason, if there is a tie, the player who had the fewer turns wins. If there is an equal number, then it's a tie. There, are you satisfied? With that out of the way, I can now go over some of the other card types that you'll see in the game. I've already gone over treasures, victories, and curses, but now we also have action cards, which are played specifically during your action phase. Follow their instructions. That's as simple as it gets. There are also attack cards, which will hurt other players directly. You will maim them with these cards, and usually you might give them curses. Please, by all means, do so. Curse them to oblivion! And then there are reaction cards, which can be used in some way at an unusual time, and it usually is stated on the card when you're able to take advantage of them. Now, keeping in mind that we're going to be discussing the cards in terms of release, again, I will start with the 1.0 cards of the base set first, before doing a video later on about what the update pack and the version 2.0 has brought to that base game alone. And this will be the course that I follow with a lot of the videos introducing the expansions and their updated versions. So to start off with, we'll go with Adventurer. Adventurer being the most expensive of the base set. It allows you to reveal cards from your deck until you reveal 2 treasures. Put those treasure cards into your hand and discard the other reveal cards. Now, that is a good effect if you don't consider the cost of the card. The card costs 6, the same amount you would pay for a gold. And honestly, I only see this if you are really trying very hard in order to get to your treasures without any of your actions being involved. If you're not running an action-heavy deck, it might be useful. But if you know you can do better with the actions on it, Adventurer can be tough to play. It does have its moments, and it's more likely to find you better treasures, but you lose out on the ability to play any actions as a result of Adventurer, so keep that in mind. Next up we have Bureaucrat, the first attack card of the set. Costing 4, you gain a silver onto your deck, and as part of the attack, each other player reveals a victory card from their hand and puts it onto their deck, or reveals a hand with no victory cards. Now, this is definitely, I feel, an early game card. You really don't want to see yourself using this very late into the game, because yes, getting silvers are good early on, but you don't want to flood yourself with too many silvers, otherwise you're going to run into problems about building your deck around other cards to use. And yes, you could give them a minor annoyance of putting a victory card on top of the deck, thereby losing the opportunity for their next turns to have one less effective card, but honestly, if they're trashing their crappier cards, they really don't mind the annoyance at that point. Next up we have Cellar. Cellar is a cheap card costing only 2, grants you simply +1 action, and then you are able to discard any number of cards in your hand to draw that many. Basically a magical mallet per se. And it is useful early on, and even in parts of the game where you have more cards in your hand than you know what to do with it. You basically want to get rid of the crappier cards that you know is not going to be useful to you to get to better cards. And that +1 action helps out a lot, because if you get the drawing power, you want to save Cellar until you know you have enough cards in your hand to be able to take advantage of its effect outrageously. Because it can get you multiple actions, multiple treasures, and possibly multiple buys too if you think about it. You definitely don't want to lead off with this unless you see your hand being absolute trash. Now next up we have Chancellor. Chancellor is a very interesting card. It costs 3 to purchase, like a silver, and if you play it, you gain +2 treasure, like a silver, but then you have the added effect of putting your deck into your discard pile. It's not super great, unless you really know you want to do that. There may be some circumstances where you know what's coming up in your hand, and it's not going to be worth playing the hand rather than shuffling the deck. It does have a niche use where if you've purchased something that you know you want to get to because it's in your discard pile, you can play it to get an instantly free shuffle and try to get that card early on, but it's very risky to do it, and that's a weak effect. So depending on the cards you have, it might be useful early game, but I would say that's about it. Next we have Chapel. Chapel only costing 2 to purchase. It simply has the effect to trash up to 4 cards from your hand. Now you might think, well, Is that good or not? I have yet to talk about the mechanic about trashing cards. There is a separate blank pile known as the trash pile that will sometimes be there with the rest of the supply. These are basically for cards that get trashed, or a better way to phrase it, banished or exiled from the game, which means once they're trash, they're not coming back, most likely. And this is actually a very good card, and very good to get early on, because you're basically looking for quality. And you want to start off with maybe potentially getting rid of the estates if you know you're going to get duchies and provinces a lot more, but there's a lot of variety. And you basically can take advantages of this every step of the way, no matter what. This is a card you want for all parts of the game, because basically you can trash your estates to get to your treasures faster, get rid of your copper so you can get to your silvers and golds once you stop purchasing them. And another big thing, if you start getting curses, you can trash those as well. And that is a useful tactic, and definitely a card you want to hold on to once you have it. And even potentially getting rid of some of the action cards you know you're not going to want to need. Next on the list, we have Council Room. Council Room being another one of the big draw engines of the base game. For 5 coins, you can purchase this, and then once played, you get +4 cards and +1 buy. That is very powerful for drawing engines, and gets you to some of those cards just as much as Cellar does. However, the one downside of the card is that each other player draws a card. Now, that is a disadvantage that you're wondering, should you give it to it? You also want to be very careful about flooding your deck with too many of these, because you could draw into your deck way too quickly and get the cards you really don't want to get in random combinations. I mean, the free draw is possible by itself, but you want to limit the amount of council rooms you have, especially since, yes, you're getting extra cards, you're getting extra buys, but you're not getting any other actions. So you need to make sure that it's worth it. If you can draw into those treasures and get enough for multiple buys, then it's worth it in my opinion. Next we have Feast. Feast costs 4 to purchase, and when you play it, you trash it to gain a card costing up to 5. Now, that might seem interesting, but you're basically spending 4 to get something that could cost 1 more. I feel like you would be wasting it. And it's a one-shot, so once you trash it, that's it. It has a dull effect if you think about it, but it could have some potential uses. For example, if you know you're going to be stuck on a turn with 1 buy, but you have multiple actions, Feast will help you get to another card that you could purchase along with your first. So it will kind of help out to build up your deck a little bit more. Definitely an early to mid-game card, but I would not have this for your late game, because there's not many options to really use it on your late game. If you're in late game and you have a Feast, you're better off using it on a duchy. But other than that, unless the card is worth it, I don't know. It's iffy at best. And once you have a Feast, you can have a Festival. Festival, which costs 5, and could be a good evolution from using Feast. It grants you +2 actions, +1 buy, and +2 coin. You get multiple things out of this card, and it's one of the best cards early on for the base game that you can definitely take advantage of. And you really want that kind of multi-use power. The actions alone benefit you just being able to play other cards in your hand, but the extra coin for being able to do so could get you to draw into golds and provinces very quickly. And the buys also help as well. You want cards like this synergizing well with any that make you draw, so this way you can really maximize your turn potential. And there's a lot of synergy with a lot of the cards using Festival as a base. Next up, we have the very first Kingdom Victory card, Gardens. Costing 4, it basically is worth 1 victory point per 10 cards you have, rounded down. Now, this is basically 10 cards you have in total between hand, discard pile, and deck, not those you have trashed. Now, depending on your deck size, this could be useful, but it really also depends on the type of deck you're running. If you are maximizing high-level treasures and getting to them very quickly, chances are you probably don't have a big deck size. I would say you would probably have less than 30 cards. At that point, Gardens would be worth 2 victory points as a case example. Really, I don't see any potential of maximizing Gardens unless you're going to buy all the Gardens and try to shoot for a big deck, but you're just bloating yourself. So, yes, depending on the setup you have, and you have very good cards to synergize with your deck to draw into all of those cards, hint in Council Room, then yes, Gardens could be potentially useful, but I only say you should have a minimum of maybe 30 cards in your deck to really benefit from Gardens. Otherwise, it's not really that fantastic. Moving on down the line, we have Laboratory. Now, Laboratory costs 5 and gives you +2 cards and +1 action. One of the stronger cards, giving you a net of +1 in terms of card draw, and basically one of the easiest ways you can take advantage into pulling it into your deck. If you pair up this with other card effects such as Festival, you can definitely take advantage of a lot of the draw power available to you, especially if you know what's coming up. It is very useful to have all throughout the game, and there's never a reason why you wouldn't want to have a card that gives you more draw power and the ability to play some more actions. And they work independently too. So you could draw into multiple laboratories to keep drawing into other cards. It has very good consistency and will synergize with a lot of cards available to you, base game and on. Moving on into the list, we have Library. Costing 5, this action card allows you to draw until you have 7 cards in your hand, skipping any action cards you choose to, setting those aside, and discarding them afterwards. Now, first off, this is a mild upgrade to Council Room, minus the buy, but your opponent doesn't get to draw into your cards. And only actions can be set aside. You're not forced to set aside the action cards, it's just an option. And it really is dependent on what you draw into it. The main downside of the card is your hand size, unfortunately. If you already have 7 cards, you play this, you've got a dead card in your hand, and that's really not great. You definitely want to have a minimal amount of cards in your hand and enough actions to take advantage of it. You also want to make sure you have cards in your hand. You basically want to approach this very carefully when using it. If you play into a giant hand size, it could come back to bite you. But if you are trying to pull for some of those better treasures, it's got some uses. Just be careful on when you play it. Moving on, we have one of my favorite cards in the base game set, and that's Market. For 5 coins, it's an action card where you gain +1 card, +1 action, +1 buy, and +1 treasure. It is the jack of all trades of cards, and it is an excellent synergizer and a useful no matter where in the game you have this. I would suggest, though, mid to late game where you want to take advantage of the buys and you have the treasures to do it. But draw power is useful on its own. Draw power with the action is fantastic. And getting some extra currency out of it is not a bad thing either. A lot of cards going forward will synergize quite well with the Market, and it's useful if you are playing it. I recommend it wholeheartedly. Now we move on to the next attack card, Militia. Costing 4, it gives you +2 currency, and then each other player discards down to 3 cards in their hand as part of the attack rule. Yes, so it's not bad for the cost. You will gain essentially a silver from an action card, and you could make their lives a living hell, but their lives could already be a living hell if they've already had a stage to draw on. It can be good. That could help you out in the long run. But you want to make sure you're able to play it every turn just to mess with your opponent. I mean, the mindfucks are pretty useful. Early game, definitely a strong advantage because you could force them to discard coppers to prevent them from getting to some better treasures and leaving them with some junk in their hands. And there's not many counters that you can really work with, but in a few moments, we are going to talk about one of the counters to the Militia. But before that, we'll talk about mine. Mine costs 5 to purchase, and then you may trash a treasure from your hand, gaining 1, costing up to 3 more than that, right directly into your hand. So that's very good if you want to get a free upgrade there. And it works out so that coppers are worth 0, silvers are worth 3, and golds are worth 6. So you can definitely do an upgrade if you're able to. So if you got this early on, you could start upgrading a lot of your currency very quickly, and it's useful. The problem is, it's tough to get 5 early on unless you draw into it easily, and you're looking for luck. And basically, it's only treasures that you can trash. So eventually, it's gonna run out of use for it, and it's entirely up to you if you want to be able to take advantage of it. Again, give or take, and it depends on the timing for it. Just remember, if you don't have any additional actions, this is your only one because it doesn't give you extras. Now, circling back to Militia, one of the cards that can prevent Militia from actually going off is the next one we're going to talk about. It is Moat. Moat is the first action-reaction card that is available. It is blue instead of white, and you can purchase it for 2. Moat simply has the effect that you can gain +2 cards. However, if an attack card is played outside of your turn, you can reveal Moat, and you're unaffected by it. It's essentially a counterspell, but basically doesn't affect the other players on the field. So, any attack card, and you don't feel like dealing with it, and you have Moat in your hand, just reveal it. And you can continue to reveal it for every attack card is played. It's good and cheap for the cost. While it does only give you 2 cards compared to a lot of the other cards in here with no additional actions, you really only should be picking up Moat if you know your opponent is going to start playing attack cards. And you really don't want to fill your deck with too many attack cards, but at the same time, you don't want to have enough that it's not worth it. And sometimes you might be lucky, sometimes you might be not. And it also is depending on the attack cards that are being played. It might be more of a benefit to let the attack go through rather than negate it. But that's entirely up to you. If you feel like you don't want to be messed with, Moat's the best way to take care of that for you. Next up, we have Moneylender. Moneylender costs 4 to purchase, and simply put, you can trash a copper from your hand for +3. So this gives you some incredible power. If you're basically getting rid of the coppers in your early deck to upgrade, hopefully, essentially, into some better currency. Remember, you have to trash the coppers in order to take advantage of it. And, it's going to run out of steam eventually if you trash every single copper that you start off with. So those 7 coppers, your Moneylender is going to become a dead card in your hand. You got to figure out what to do with it at that point. But early on, can get you to silvers, could potentially get you to golds as well if you play it quickly enough. And you basically want to make sure that you get it as soon as you can and start taking advantage of it, because if your deck gets too bloated and big, you might not run into it fast enough to really warrant to it. I recommend maybe 1 per, unless you want a copper engine, which, why? No, don't do that. Remodel costs 4 to purchase, and when it's played, you trash a card from your hand, gain a card costing up to 2 more than it. Now, this is more of a better mine if you think about it. First off, mine specifically targets treasures. Remodel does not. You could basically take advantage of any card in your hand to upgrade it to something better. If you had a 4-cost card that you know you weren't using, and you wanted to get rid of it, then you would be able to with this, and it would be much more useful, spoilers, Moneylender at that point. Moneylender could essentially turn into a gold, and it's more flexible because you never know. You basically are able to take advantage of it throughout the entirety of the game, rather than when you reach a point where you don't have any more of a cards to benefit from. Again, Moneylender. Trashing estates early on, useful to turn it into better action cards, and then turning those action cards into like golds. You have some combos set up, and there's a lot of potency for this, and flexibility, that's the key. Moving on, we have Smithy. Smithy, simply for 4 coins a pie, gives you +3 cards. It is a very solid draw card engine, and basically that's all it does. You're basically drawing 3 cards, giving you a net advantage of +2. However, it should not be the first card you play if you have cards that give you more actions. Why? Because if you draw into actions, you're shit out of luck. Sorry, buddy. You want to make sure that you could potentially take advantage of Smithy. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on some potential combinations with it. Alright, next up we have Spy. Spy costs 4 to purchase. It gives you +1 card, +1 action, and for the attack, each player, including you, reveals the top card of his or her deck, and either discards it or puts it back, your choice. Now, this is actually a very decent attack card, just because of the fact you get an extra draw before you reveal the top card of your attack. The attack goes second rather than first. It isn't the strongest attack card because depending on how late in the game it is, you could potentially reveal a province for your opponent. And even so, they could still draw into a couple of golds and still be able to take advantage of their hand. But it is a simple one to get things started. It was considered to be a weak card with an effect that was rarely impactful. I mean, you could take advantage of its reordering ability when it's comboed with another card I'll talk about down the list, but there's not much worth to being able to do this on a constant basis. I mean, if you look at the supply pile and you see nothing else worth 4 or less worth taking besides the silver, go for it. And continuing the attacks, we have Thief. Thief costing 4 to purchase. Each other player reveals the top 2 cards of the deck. If any of those cards are revealed treasure cards, they trash one of them that you choose, and you may also gain one of those trash treasure cards. Then they discard the others. So, it can be decent, but I'd say mid to late game. Early on, you'd be trashing coppers, and you gain coppers. Not useful. So, if you're basically trashing coppers and you had too many of them, you wouldn't want to gain that. So the best you would be doing is trashing it for them. You're basically hoping late game that they have silvers and golds, mostly, to be able to take advantage of. But again, you could be potentially running into someone that has moats. It wasn't great. It's a very weak card. And you might not want to purchase it if you want to be known as a main villain. And if you're getting rid of their coppers early on and they can't do anything about it, that basically ruins the game for them to some degree. So really, really limit yourself to using Thief unless you want to be the almighty scumbag that you are. Next up, we have Throne Room. Now, Throne Room costing 4 to purchase. Simply allows you to play an action card from your hand twice. This synergizes with everything. I would recommend multiple actions for your cards, such as Festival and Market, just so that you can get some additional power out of it. Purchases, it's very useful and could work well with so many cards. And even when you add future expansions into the list, the Throne Room is still potentially useful, depending on what the card does. Keep it in mind. Always good to have it on hand in case you need it. It's a must-have. And then we have Village. Village costing 3, it gives you +1 card, +2 actions. This is basically just drawing into your cards a lot more and giving you a ton of actions. It's one of the cheapest ways to play out your draw cards because then you can at least waste the action on things like Cellar, things like Throne Room. I'm sorry, not Throne Room, Council Room.
Oh.
And just other potential drawers. Library 2 can be useful in this aspect as well. This is good to have, and you can make a mistake and still take advantage of this and try to recover as best as possible. Definitely have a few of these, and for the cost, definitely worth getting early on to potentially draw into your treasures quickly just to maximize your overall profit. Coming up to the end of the attack cards, we have Witch being the first one to implement one of the other cards in the supply pile. Costing 5 to purchase, it allows you to draw 2 cards, and as the attack, it forces your opponents to take a curse. This is where the -1 victory point curse cards come into play, and this is where you can make life a little bit difficult. Depending on the Kingdom card supply pile, you may not have the option to trash the curses, so this could be a very positive benefit from you. And just force your opponent to just draw into curses, wasting their turns. So basically, you will mess with your opponent more so than not. It will slow down your opponent's decks unless they're able to trash the cards. Now, if you are the recipient of these curses, remember, you want to take advantage of trashing the cards. And there are, of course, a couple of ways you can do that. Obviously, Chapel is the easiest, especially if you have multiple curses in your hand. Remodel, also a good one, but keep in mind, Remodel gives you 2 more in currency, so the curses are worth 0. So just keep that in mind. Chapel might be a better option in that case. Of course, you can prevent that if you happen to have the Moat in your hand to react to prevent the effect of Witch. However, your opponent still gets the +2 draw power, and even if you run out of curses, +2, not bad. It is useful if you can get Witch early on, just to help distribute the curses a lot faster. Second to last card on the list, we have Woodcutter. Woodcutter is simply a silver with a buy. It costs 3 to purchase, +1 buy, +2 currency. Yeah, that's basically all it does. It gives you essentially a silver in the form of an action card and a buy. What's the problem with it? I mean, it's not a weak card per se, but it doesn't give you actions, and honestly, only useful if it's the only card in your hand and you got treasures to bulk up with. It is cheap for the cost, and you could potentially replace a silver with this, but again, unless you have the actions to benefit from, I wouldn't take advantage of Woodcutter unless you know you can really pour it out there. It's not a bad card per se. Synergy is your key here, and it really depends on when you can play it. And finally, we have Workshop. Workshop, which costs 3 to purchase, it allows you to gain a card costing up to 4. The difference here is, unlike Feast, you don't have to trash the card. And depending on what's on the field, you could definitely do wonders with this card. A lot of the base game cards, a majority of them are 4 cost or less, and getting something to spending 3 to get something to go for 4, it's a little bit of a one-up there. Again, it works the same way as Feast's effect, except it's up to 4 instead of 5. And unless there's good targets you can benefit from, not worth going for Workshop. You could use it to gain silvers, but you're just better off buying the silvers a different way as well. It also depends on what's on the field. Take a look at what your Kingdom supply piles have, and see if Workshop is an effective card to pick up. And with that, that is the list of all of the Kingdom cards in the base game 1.0 version. Now, like I said, I will discuss the 2.0 cards in another video, detailing which of the 1.0 cards were removed and what was added into the 1.0 one. But this is a good way to get started, so I want to try to keep it as separated as possible. And with that, that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I'm going to make this into a regular series and continue here. We'll discuss more on some other cards later on. And if you like what you see, potentially we might talk about some combinations we could do with a bunch of the Kingdom cards that you're using. I'd also like to take a mention that I will be also streaming on my Twitch channel every Friday a round of Dominion through the Steam app that is available for open access. I recommend to check it out if you want to get interested in the game, but you want to try some of the cards first before you purchase physical copies. I recommend getting this as physical copies or Steam to be able to enjoy with other people, and just take advantage of it when you can. Thank you again for watching, guys. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Twitch to get more of my lovely Demented content. And I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you on the next video. Sayonara!